house. I'm free. Thank goodness you saved me from...
Finales are a tough thing to write and execute properly, especially in the world of animation. Whether it's stressful time constraints, the show being cut short, themes and plot threads not being tied together in a satisfying manner, or just the result of being completely inept. Animated shows tend to have it rough when it comes to endings, and oftentimes, regardless of a show's high points, it will always be remembered by a tragically awful ending, or something that leaves you feeling as if your time has been wasted. There's always the rare exception that goes above and beyond to deliver an ending that's as satisfying as possible, even if they do have their own problems. But in general, I don't think it's a stretch to say that a lot of us have been burned one way or another by one of our favourite shows ending with a whimper as opposed to the loud bang that it deserved. With all of this in mind, we jump back to the Owl House. Out of all the shows to release over the last 10 years, none have caused me to completely reevaluate the way I looked at something the way the Owl House has. My thoughts on the show very quickly shifted from finding it incredibly flawed but still okay in its first season, to praising it with every fibre of my being with its second season. It's a show with a lot of moving parts that is constantly working against the absolutely awful conditions placed upon it by its network, making the dumbest decisions known to mankind. But despite it all, the show kept itself laser focused on doing as much as it could, knowing its limits and knowing when to go all out, and to go full steam ahead with the plot that they were previously building up to without rushing the majority of its character development and story revelations. It's a shining example of making the most out of a bad situation, and the fact that it still ends up being a great show despite everything working against it is nothing short of admirable. To steal what I said in the last Owl House video, the Owl House Season 2 is a testament to the skill of its writers. Despite seemingly rushing through the story after having its third season unfairly cut short, adding to the growing list of reasons for why Disney should burn to the ground, it hasn't left any of its episodes and ideas half done, managing to contain itself within a solid 22 minutes consistently without overwhelming people, and managing to set up a completely different finale compared to what was originally planned while still making it fit naturally what had been written up to that point is absolutely mind-blowing. I have nothing but respect for Dana Terrace and everyone who worked so incredibly hard to make the show the best it could possibly be, despite the dire circumstances. But even though my feelings towards the second season were incredibly positive, nothing could get rid of the nagging feeling, or, well, let's just call it PTSD, that I had developed after years of being burned by a show completely eating shit at the last hurdle.
He's going over that cliff! Ah!
Okay, that's the last Star versus joke I'm making, I promise. There was a potentially brilliant ending to be told here, with such an intriguing premise that can lead to many impactful reveals and heartbreaking moments. But just because the ingredients were there doesn't mean the show's finale being a masterpiece was a given. After all, the show was on a very limited amount of time, even with the extended runtime per episode. If they were going to make this ending work, they needed to make sure every second counted, and that just enough stones were turned. And above all, it needed to be satisfying and rewarding for fans in a way that transcended the faster than usual pacing. We waited with bated breath, preparing for the worst while still retaining our optimism that the show would spit directly in the face of the executives and come out on top. And now that season 3 has officially concluded, I can say with confidence that yeah, it was pretty good. Alright, well, let's step back a bit. This finale is no masterpiece. It ain't perfect, and I never expected it to be so. But within the realms of realistic expectations, this is really the best ending we could have possibly gotten, and that's a great thing. And to be clear, I'm not just talking about the final episode here. I'm talking about all 3 episodes of Season 3. Since they're all 40 minutes long and combined together, you basically have a feature-length Owl House movie. There's a lot of stuff I wish was executed better, some things I would have liked some more elaboration on, and you'll get those complaints soon enough, but I can't understate how great this ended up being overall. I'll be tackling each episode one by one as usual, giving my thoughts on everything as I go along, from my loving praise to my loving critiques, because even though a lot of the issues I bring up couldn't be helped, as the show had much more important things to focus on with how much time was left, there's still valid complaints of mine, and I wanted to shed some light on some possibilities that could have possibly, in another timeline, made the ending even better. So take some deep breaths and get your copium ready. This is my final look at the Owl House and how its finale was almost perfect. Alright, superficial notes out of the way first. The animation and artwork in all of these episodes is at the top of its game. This was, of course, expected for a finale, but it's worth mentioning either way. The action scenes are the best they've ever looked, going all out in terms of spectacle and solidifying the importance of the fights themselves. Backgrounds are astoundingly pretty, especially in episodes 2 and 3, and when it comes to nailing the atmosphere, it's never been better. I was also surprised by the soundtrack. Owl House has always had a decent soundtrack, but there's only been a few tracks that have genuinely made me go, damn, that's a spicy OST. But there are far more more memorable pieces in these episodes compared to the rest of the show, especially in the last episode, and I feel it deserves some attention even if I'm mainly focusing on the story for this video. Now onto the episode itself. One of the first thoughts to cross my mind about Thanks to Them was how different it felt in comparison to everything we had seen from the show outside of the finale of season 2. I remember reading somewhere that Dana originally wanted the Owl House to have a much darker tone and to be aimed at an older demographic, but that she had to drastically tone her ideas down for the show's first season, and that several parts of season 2 are much closer to what she originally had planned for the show to feel like, but still being constrained to Disney guidelines. Thanks to Them, while still retaining a lot of the show's kid-friendly DNA, feels a lot more in line with a show that's aimed at young teens and young adults, as opposed to finding a way for a show primarily aimed at children to appeal to that demographic, if that makes sense. Even the outfits and character designs in this episode are reminiscent of the show's original designs. While this isn't a major thing to point out, I think it speaks volumes as to how much potential there was for the Owl House as a series aimed at older audiences as opposed to being restricted the way it was. The tone of this episode and the way it's written with that tone in mind, allowing the show to get away with many things it previously couldn't do, often directly at the expense of Disney executives. This is the kind of spite I can get down with. Just works so much better than what they were doing previously. Owl House never felt like a kids show that just so happened to attract an older audience. It felt like a show aimed at an older audience that was trapped within Disney's kid-friendly guidelines. And the way these characters in the world they live in are able to flourish with just a slight change of tone and a clearer focus on storytelling as opposed to the sillier comedic adventures that plagued season 1, the body swap episode gave me several types of Ebola, proves that from the very beginning this show deserved better. I'm obviously not against there being smaller scale comedic episodes, but season 1 had so many things it wanted to set up that it felt as if the series was wasting time instead of getting us more attached to the characters. You can disagree with that if you want. But the more mature tone and focused storytelling works wonders for this show in particular. It's not a matter of preferring things that are more adult, the show just works better like this. Of course, with the storytelling now being the main focus, it does lead to these last 3 episodes feeling rushed in places. It's always moving at a fast pace, covering so many different subjects and often having to use montages in order to make space for the rest of the story. The opening montage gives us a glimpse of what the season could have been like if it wasn't cut short, giving us a multitude of adventures on Earth that would have possibly been a stand-in for the comedic misadventures on the Boiling Isles, but I believe there's a lot of potential here. In an ideal scenario, the episodes would cut back and forth between Luz's life and the Collector, building them up as an antagonist and giving them more time to breathe and be fleshed out. It would have been similar to what Amphibia did with the first half of season 3, though that's not exactly a first for this show, but in an ideal world, I'd see this as being the best course of action. I still think the Collector works as an antagonist, more on that later, but more screen time would have 100% benefited both them as well as Luz and her friends being on Earth. Even with the missed potential though, this montage does an excellent job of moving the plot forward, showing the passing of time to where we are now with everyone's aged up character designs. In general, the writing is able to take advantage of the fast pacing, managing to contain several important character moments amid the constantly moving plot without downsizing them or mitigating their impact. Luz and Hunter are at the center of the episode, both incredibly anxious and afraid that the others will find out that Luz helped Belos meet the Collector in the first place, and that Hunter is a Grimwalker. Luz is at her lowest point here, believing that she's truly failed her friends and loved ones, clearly not being able to cope with it. She's regressed a lot from her bubbling, optimistic personality that she had in season 1, and we've watched her personality and approach to situations gradually shift as the stakes grew higher throughout season 2. She's always wanted to do the right thing, but ever since she's decided to do the right thing in a way that results in her feeling like a worse person, she's been constantly conflicted and angry with herself, afraid that she'll lose everything if her friends find out she accidentally assisted Belos. Obviously this doesn't happen, and everyone understands that Belos was manipulating her, but Luz being as shattered as she is in this episode and then spending the rest of the finale being rebuilt was an excellent choice. Now Hunter. Holy god. Hunter is basically solidified as my favorite Owl House character now, and he's easily the most compelling character in the show. Throughout Hunter's life, he's grown up with no frame of reference of what a healthy relationship looks like. He was chastised and emotionally abused by Belos when he was the Golden Guard if he did anything considered out of line, and for being an individual person. Because of this, he's desperate to hold on to the people he holds close, unaware that their love for him is unconditional. He's constantly afraid that if people find out that he's a Grimwalker, they'll abandon him and he'll be left isolated once more. In his eyes, revealing that he's a Grimwalker, a clone made to replicate Belos' brother, is just as dangerous as stepping out of line. So when you have these scenes of Luz and Hunter talking to each other, both being able to relate to their own shared trauma from Belos, almost having a sibling relationship going on, and you get that small moment where Hunter cries underneath his mask when Luz says that he's family, is just so perfect. Those few words, that "I really care for you" moment, is so important for someone like Hunter to hear. And while this isn't the last time their characters are touched on in the finale, Thanks to Them is easily the most emotionally charged and delicate intricately handled Luz and Hunter are over the course of the series. But that's not to say the other characters aren't entirely disregarded. The episode has a clear focus on the importance of stories, and how the cats relate to those stories, seeing aspects of themselves within them. Obviously there's Azure, that's been relevant since the beginning, but the knockoff Star Trek stuff that Camilla's into, Hunter identifying with one of the characters being a clone, with that specific parallel leading into Gus revealing to Hunter that he knows he's a Grimwalker. Luz projects her frustrations with herself onto the protagonist of a novel she's talking about in class, masking them as critiques of the hero's actions. It's all very blatant, but it's incredibly effective. I don't have a whole lot else to say for Camilla and Flapjack, but they made for some of the most hard-hitting moments of the series. Finding out Luz's book report, the thing that kicked off the entire series, was meant to be her way of reaching out to her mother, and that she was introduced to the Azure books by her father before he passed away was a massive kick in the gut, and adding on Camilla defending Luz her entire life from people who just didn't understand her adds so much weight behind her initial agreement with sending Luz to summer camp. Luz and Camilla's relationship specifically is superbly handled here. Flapjack's death is very upsetting, but I don't think it was as impactful as it could have been. That's 100% not the show's fault, given Flapjack hasn't been in the show for very long, but it's worth mentioning. There's lots of stuff I would have liked more of, such as more elaboration on Philip and Kayla's backstories, but the stuff that's here works with everything else that's done near flawlessly, to the point where detracting points due to a missed opportunity seems redundant. That's why I really love thanks to them. It's incredibly airtight, it makes everything work, and at its worst the execution is only passable, and at its absolute best, which is pretty much 80% of the time, it's easily among the best stuff to come out of this series. Tonal whiplash is a dissonance between tones, a lack of narrative coherence, or the evil headache caused by a nonsensical explanation. Yeah, I guess that sums up For the Future pretty well. What's happened here? Okay, calm down, the episode isn't bad, far from it, but this is scarily close to what I thought was gonna happen to the show as a worst case scenario. Getting caught up in subplots that aren't worth a damn, focusing on characters that are definitely not worth a damn, and feeling incredibly half-baked. There's some good stuff in this episode, but it's surrounded by lots of meandering, and it results in a startling amount of time being wasted. If Thanks to Them was an airtight masterclass that simmered my fears of where the show's finale could have gone, For the Future makes me want to purchase a firearm. Let's start with the positives. The Collector is finally given some more time to be fleshed out as a legitimate threat and a worthy succeeding antagonist to Belos. It's still very evident that the Collector wasn't a natural part of this story from the beginning, and was made just for the purpose of this finale, but his childish mannerisms and playfulness make him fun to watch while still making it clear that he's dangerous. He is a child with limitless power, but doesn't understand the toll that power has on others. He sees the world around him as his play pit and the people he has power over as toys, believing he can simply fix them if any of them break. He is not a villain at all, and it makes him incredibly interesting. Belos is still the main threat and gets plenty of screen time, so the Collector being present is not a massive issue, and I think they work rather well. Willow is finally given a proper arc, even if it is rushed. I've always wanted to connect to Willow as a character or feel something whenever she's on screen, but her and Gus have just never gotten the amount of attention that Luz, Amity, and Hunter have gotten. For the best, seeing as those characters are vitally important to the story and development of other characters, but it's still a shame that Willow and Gus never got the depth that they truly deserved. They had their one-off episodes and moments here and there, but they barely scratched the surface. Her finally venting her anxiety and stress to someone close to her after melting down for the entire episode still doesn't fix a lot of my problems with her having no depth, but it's still an effective arc and finally made me come around on that Hunter and Willow ship that I thought just came out of thin air previously. Hunter being such a traumatized character, being the one who's there for Willow and makes her feel comfortable enough to vent is legitimately touching. Luz's palisman finally hatching was very cool, and the moment between her and Camilla as she realizes that she's only ever wanted to be understood, and Camilla apologizing for trying to change Luz into something she isn't, was an emotionally powerful, if very shoddily paced scene. And overall, there's more stuff here that works than there is stuff that doesn't work. Showing us King's friendship with the Collector not strictly being something he was forced into, showing genuine care despite being wary of their immense power, catching us up on Ida and Lilith's predicament, and Belos, Belos is just horrific at this point, crawling around in a slowly melting body trying to find a single vessel he can possess that will allow him to continue manipulating his way to victory. And the scene where the ghosts of Caleb and the previous Golden Guards look down on him was both chilling and hilarious of how Belos just shrugs them off. Now we'll go over the stuff that doesn't work. Let's get the obvious out of the way. Boscha, get the fuck out of here! When we return to the Boiling Isles, now under the Collector's reign, I expected for there to be plenty of returning characters and that some of them would get a bit of focus, but Boscha, it just doesn't work. I get that the entire point of her inclusion here was to make her slightly more interesting or give her some forward development, but the show doesn't have time to give a bully side character her own arc or level of importance if she wasn't important to begin with. Her whole thing with Amity should have been done last season, and it just made her a lot more unbearable. I have no idea what they were attempting to do with this character, but it forced falls apart very quickly. I can understand wanting to revisit Hexside or some of the students, or follow me with one of the episode's highlights, but considering the other things that are going on right now in the story, it feels weirdly unnatural for this sort of time wasting to occur when those parts could have been fleshed out more. And I will be harsh with calling it time wasting because barely anything happens here that's of any importance, and the stuff that is important could have been used in an entirely different circumstance. What that could have been is up to you, but surely anything would have been better than this, right? Just anything slightly more interesting. Next up, Kikimora. Why? Why is this character here? She was mildly entertaining in season 2 and even helped King in the finale after Bellis betrayed her. Unless you were going to make her more interesting, there's no reason to bring her back. She's the exact same character as she's been throughout the entire series, just being an evil prick for the sake of being an evil prick. And pairing her with Basha of all people just leaves a horrid taste in my mouth. Two of the show's most insignificant antagonists paired with a subplot that absolutely pales in comparison to the ongoing story. This would have been a perfect time to have Luz and her friends discover more about Philip and Caleb through some sort of method, I don't know. We could have gotten more info regarding the collector's backstory instead of just cramming it into the final episode. There could have been more world building in a variety of areas here, and it's bewildering for a show that's been so laser focused on getting as much done as possible to suddenly derail like this in the same way season 1 used to do. Then we have some smaller problems such as Ida and Lilith breaking free from the collector off screen and finding out the collector is weak to Titans with very little effort. This is a natural issue of the time skip between season 2's finale to now, but it could have easily been remedied at some point via a flashback or something. This is one of the few examples I can find of the show's writing issues being the fault of the crew rather than Disney's dogshit dealings. It makes for a very puzzling episode. Decent, but not solid. At least in the moments Ida and Lilith are on screen are as fun to watch as usual, but I did find that the comedy in this episode felt a lot more forced than it usually does. Mostly amounting to MCU-isms like, that just happened. It's a strange episode. Not awful, but not great. It just meanders, sort of like me because I'm starting to repeat myself. It left me fearing for how the next episode would turn out given it's the last one we were going to get. The end of the Owl House for the foreseeable future, regardless of any copium we can get our hands on. I prepared myself for the worst while still keeping my expectations measured for a finale that would at least be decent. But thankfully, the last episode sort of reassured me and everyone else that everything would be okay. It's difficult to put into words how I felt about this episode. The emotions it made me feel, how much it managed to satisfy me and my expectations, how I truly felt about how it was written, and how it made me feel about the show as a whole. So I wanted to start this section by stating the obvious. Watching and Dreaming is a great episode, one of the best in the series. But it's not just a great episode to me, it felt like a victory lap, a massive sigh of relief from the Owl House crew who poured their hearts and souls into making this finale work as an emotional rollercoaster. Not content with ending the series with a massive debate around the events of its climax, the actions of the characters, or any of that shit. They wanted the Owl House and its lovable cast of characters to have a happy send-off. One that probably wasn't planned from the beginning, but it's the one that everyone involved with the show, the cast, crew, fans, all deserved after the strife that it's been through during its production. With what little time there was left, the show stood with confidence and gave everyone a happy ending. An emotional happy ending, obviously, with plenty of scenes that were shocking and impactful, but leaving the show on a sad or bittersweet note knowing there would be no continuation going forward just wouldn't have felt right to me. While I would love to live in a world where Dana Terrace and company got to make the show exactly the way they had originally planned. No collector, no rushed pacing, no sudden shifts in tone or direction, and that this version of the show would have been perfectly justified to have ended on a sad or bittersweet note. Watching and Dreaming delivers the ending that the show deserves after everything it's been through, and it's about as close to perfect as it could possibly be. Now onto the episode itself. While I can't say opening on the characters' nightmares was the most original way to go, it serves as a good test to see where these characters are now compared to where they were previously in the story, and having Luz, Ida, and King finally reunite and offer to help the collector through walking them through their own stories, teaching them the typical lessons you'd expect about kindness, friendship, and forgiveness, but it feels more impactful now that we finally have that distinction between the collector and their siblings, how the collector was tricked and betrayed and desperately wants a friend, really leaning into how he's just a child, inexperienced, highly emotional, and incredibly misguided, and all of this stuff feels like it could have been its own episode, yet it somehow feels naturally written into the story here. I would have loved to have seen more of the collector and their backstory, but what we have here still works and allows us to care for the collector as they begin opening up more and more to the idea of learning from their mistakes, and how they want to learn more about kindness and forgiveness and stuff like that. But then we juxtapose that with Bellis' return to the spotlight, someone who lies, cheats, and manipulates all the way into his death. Every moment he is scheming, controlling people, and refusing to learn from any of their past actions based on his pure hatred and bigotry towards witches. The scene where the collector flies up to Bellis and attempts to stop him him by showing him surface level kindness and forgiveness, believing it would put a stop to everything only for it to backfire as Belus immediately attacks, was perfectly executed. It makes it very clear that kindness, love and forgiveness is not always going to work. It's not the magic solution to every problem despite it being the right thing. There is a limit, and when it comes to pure unshakable hatred and bigotry like with Belus, it's not the solution. The show firmly believes in the best within people, but that redemption and forgiveness must be earned, and after everything Belus has done, he is in no position to receive either. Seeing the collector's reaction to not being able to fix Luz after she sacrifices herself for his safety, slowly having the weight of everything come crashing down on him, was incredibly well done, and Luz's death scene in particular was beautifully executed. Now obviously Luz wasn't going to stay dead. I've had enough experiences with Disney shows baiting character deaths, thank you, but I can't deny how good the atmosphere and direction of this scene is. With the lights floating across the corrupted aisles, the collector not comprehending the situation and frantically trying to fix Luz, all capped off with King launching a counterattack on Belus, no longer letting out the comedic that he used to, instead being a full-blown roar. As cliche as this sounds, I got chills from hearing that, and watching Ida lose control alongside King as they attack Belus together was devastating. Despite the predictability of Luz coming back, it does a fantastic job of selling that feeling of hopelessness and how much loss and anger is rushing through Ida and King as they charge forth at a nigh unstoppable enemy. Meanwhile, one of the most powerful beings in the universe quivers below them. Aaron Hansen jump scare. What is this?! Honestly, King, probably for the best you didn't find your dad. No one wants to be known as the son of Game Grumps. In all seriousness, Aaron does a fantastic job with the little screen time he has as King's dad, and his conversation with Luz, his regrets about trapping the collector for nothing, him looking through the cubes to watch over King and those that have been kind to him. It's incredibly heartwarming and adds so much personality and depth to the Titan in such a short amount of time. Digging the bad girl Coven shirt too, thank god it wasn't the other unholy being this show spawned. You can argue giving Luz superpowers is an ass pull, but it at least makes sense. And getting to see Ida finally teach Luz how to do magic now that there's no barrier between her and a common method of using magic was immensely satisfying. Titan Luz in general has a baller design, and the animation and music during this whole sequence is incredible. I continue to be shocked at how flexible the Owl House's theme song is, and if you're not adding an electric guitar to your main theme for the final battle, you felt as a finale in my eyes. Joking aside, easily the best action sequence of the show. Gotta admit though, I wish Season 2's opening wasn't a direct callback to the first seasons. I feel it takes a lot of the impact away from the Azure callback as Luz screams as she rips Belus out of the Titan's heart. I don't know, I would have felt it would be better if they didn't already use that callback for the joke at the start of Season 2. Would have made the full circle feeling they were going for here hit a lot harder. Belus's death scene was simply perfect. One last creepy but pathetic attempt at manipulating both him and Luz, knowing it's futile, and having him melt in acid rain as he slowly crawls towards Luz before being stomped to death by Ida, King and Rain. A fitting end, not drawn out, not too short, destroyed without mercy due to relying on old tricks. I've avoided talking about the obvious Steven Universe jokes people have made about Belus literally rejecting the collector's forgiveness, because as you know, the unwritten rule of media discussion is that all conversations will eventually lead back to Steven Universe. But it really is great that we still have villains who are 100% evil, yet not cartoonishly simplistic in their motivations for being so. In fact, Belus being consumed by such hatred for a group of people he can't understand, so he feels the need to control and eventually destroy them, is incredibly realistic. And it's still not as simple as that, given his brother Caleb fell in love with a witch, which does still bring me back to my point of wanting more in him and Caleb's past, but what we have works. Now, the final third of the episode is a little strange, but I honestly love it. There's no dialogue spoken for a good majority of it, aside from Luz's voiceover, and it shows the mending of the Isles, the collector fixing what they had previously done and becoming a better person, no longer misguided by his childish judgment, finally reuniting the characters, and then giving us a massive time skip of about a few years, giving us some neat misdirection of us thinking Luz is moving away for college before showing us that she studied for the University of Wild Magic and that she hasn't abandoned the Boiling Isles at all. She still visits them regularly, and that there's a new door connecting the realms together. This is drastically different from shows like Gravity Falls and Amphibia, which all had endings that emphasized the importance of letting go of your childhood, shown through the characters leaving the places they had been for the whole series, especially in Amphibia's case, given there was no way to return to Amphibia after the girls left, Marcy's journal notwithstanding. And I've seen some people complain about this surprisingly, but the thing is, the Owl House isn't about growing up and letting go of your childhood. It's still a coming of age story, no doubt, but it's not about letting go. Even though it was heavy-handed to begin with, the Owl House has always been about finding a sense of belonging, finding people that you can relate to when you feel like an outcast, as if no one understands you, like how Luz felt. It brings me back to one of the first interviews Dana Terrace gave about the show, detailing how having an artsy or creative hobby as a kid can often end up with you feeling left out and isolated, being completely detached from people and struggling for a while before you finally discover a community you belong to. While in today's times it's much easier for creative kids to connect and be more open with their hobbies, it's still a very real struggle that a lot of people have growing up. Luz finds her crowd in the Boiling Isles. She finds people that accept her, love her, cherish her. She finally feels understood, but at the end of the series isn't using the Boiling Isles to escape from reality entirely. She can still return home when she pleases, and honestly, I think that's the best way to leave it. If Luz was forced to leave the Boiling Isles, all the friends and loved ones that she's grown a deep connection to and have helped her become a stronger person and helped her find her sense of community, then that ending wouldn't work the same way Amphibious did. It would be unfair to take Luz away considering the difference in themes. Furthermore, it wouldn't work if she was forever stuck in the Boiling Isles. The best solution was to keep the doors between realms open, and I greatly prefer it like that. It may seem like an easy conclusion to some people, that Luz didn't have to go through the same sad ordeal that Anne or the Pines twins went through, but Luz has already been through so much, and the show has gone to great lengths to rebuild her confidence after enduring so much trauma. Making the ending needlessly sad when it serves no narrative purpose would have been a detriment to this ending. In fact, it might have been enough to make the ending bad as a whole. I think I'm content with having a happy ending for these characters where everything seems to work out. Back on track though, this final epilogue as the credits roll is hands down one of the most beautiful, heartwarming yet devastating ends to a Disney show I've ever seen. There's no dialogue, yet seeing everyone interact after the time skip, their aged up designs, their new jobs and goals, bringing closure to characters that couldn't be included due to a lack of time, doing justice to as many people as possible as everyone gets the happy ending that they rightfully deserve, all the while the music swells in the background, playing a soul-destroying remix of the show's credits song. I'm gonna be honest, I started tearing up. It's an ending for a show that's managed to find peace despite its dire circumstances, and it's an ending that's filled with so much love for its fan base without it being overbearing. Having that final scene as Luz and the rest of the cast wave goodbye to the Collector, only for the camera to swing around as they wave goodbye to the audience, was such a predictable trick, but it got me. All in all, I don't care if the ending wasn't perfect. I don't care that it's messy at times, or that it's sometimes derailed and lost focus, and I certainly don't mind that there are a ton of opportunities that they were unable to fully explore that would have made the show better and more fulfilling, because at the end of the day, this show was given an impossible task. Conclude your series with only 3 episodes. 3 episodes that were each an hour long, mind you, but that sort of task is one that I do not envy. I can't imagine the pressure everyone was under to make the show stick the landing, and honestly, the fact that it ended well at all is an astonishing achievement worthy of my praise. But they went above and beyond to make sure the show had the incredible send-off that it truly deserved, made everything feel as natural as it possibly could have been. Even though I recognize that Amphibia and Gravity Falls may have had better endings on the writing level, the Owl House succeeds in producing a truly magical ending that I honestly think hits harder than Amphibia's for me. Maybe not Gravity Falls, that's still really hard to top, but the Owl House's finale was almost perfect. There's not a whole lot else I can say about it. I originally had a lot more written down, but I chose to significantly cut down the script for a few reasons. Mainly because I ended up repeating myself a lot, but also because I wanted to leave more time for me to talk about how much the show has affected me. I bring it up in each Owl House video and frequently make a punchline out of it in my newer videos, but anyway, I originally made a review of the Owl House back in 2020, mostly a brutally savage critique of the show's first season while still agreeing that it was okay. I made this review during a time where I didn't really know who I was yet. I was recently turned 16-year-old and was surrounded by edgier, provocative content creators growing up, and while I never let them compromise my own beliefs, I felt as if I could produce a similar style of content, provocative jokes mixed with critique. Needless to say, I didn't do a good job. And a few months into 2021, before I turned 17, I put a stop to that kind of content altogether and opted to make videos that more accurately reflected my true, unbiased feelings towards things. That kind of content made me feel gross, and I genuinely really do not like making people upset. It's why I've been making so many videos delving deep into topics I have an actual passion for and trying not to alienate any potential viewers. This video served as a good lesson for me. I was still a dumb kid figuring things out, and after refining how I approach making reviews of things I'm interested in, I returned to the Owl House. And after I previously had lukewarm feelings about it, blown to an exaggerated proportion in the form of a bad YouTube video, I was surprised by how utterly captivated I was by its second season. I became a bona fide fan, I joined in on fan discussions, and I wanted to express the love I had for this series on YouTube in a way that made up for the damage my first video had caused to the discourse surrounding the show. And after having a lot of time to mellow out as a person, I started to really connect with the show like so many others were. I began relating to its characters and its core themes now that they were being fleshed out, and it very quickly became one of my favorite shows currently airing on TV. I've had a complicated journey of this show to say the least, and I've had a lot to think about in regards to its ending. I felt like as I was finally growing and maturing into an adult, that this show was helping me mellow out and getting me to stop constantly shielding myself and how I actually felt about things, and that I was allowed to feel sentimental and positive about something on YouTube. I'm not acting as if the Owl House was a life-changing masterpiece or anything of the sort, but even though I can't put it into words properly, this show has affected me a lot. I let the show's message finally sink in instead of covering myself up in cynicism. You get the picture. I never expected that the end of the show would genuinely make me shed a tear. I'm thankful that it's allowed me to recognize a lot of flaws of how I used to make my videos and how I used to be, even if it wasn't their intention. I'm grateful that shows like the Owl House can exist, and I hope more shows like it are made in the future, just with less cancellations and stuff like that. I don't really have a proper ending for this video other than saying I love the Owl House. A lot. Oh, and also, can you guys stop blaming Kif? Like, are you